As a former yo-yo dieter of 30 years, I've had my fair share of diets that I hated. Over the years, I've tried everything from gulping down chalky shakes to dipping my fork in fat-free dressing with tasteless lettuce to choking down nothing but meat for an entire week. And I did it all in the name of quick weight loss. Want to know what happened even faster than losing a few pounds on these miserable diets? I regained every single pound after falling off track. And I always fell off track mostly because none of these diets are meant to last longer than a few weeks. Because if they did, the $76 billion weight loss industry wouldn't be a $76 billion industry. So the bad news is I, like too many others, wasted decades of my life failing fad diet after fad diet. But I do have good news because I finally figured out that you can eat the foods you love while reaching your goals. No, seriously, you can eat any of your favorite meals while watching the scale drop week after week. In fact, when I had my sights set on losing 40 pounds this past year, I regularly indulged in my favorite meals like nachos, orange chicken with fried rice, and even a Cheesecake Factory cheeseburger with fries. Now, you're probably thinking, how can anyone lose weight while eating anything from the Cheesecake Factory? Because have you seen the calorie counts on that menu? Yes, I have, and that's exactly how I eat what I love while still losing weight. I use all of the nutrition information available, do a little math, and then figure out how to make any of my favorite meals fit into my calorie budget. And even though weight loss is more complicated than doing a little math, there are a few fat loss tricks I picked up that make eating what you love so much easier. So if you want to quit miserable diets for good and instead eat what you love, then let's talk about the 5 rules I follow that make eating my favorite foods a reality. The first rule I follow is to prioritize protein. Making sure that every meal has at least 30 to 50 grams of protein helps me feel fuller on less calories. And since sustainable fat loss comes down to eating less than you burn, eating enough of the most satiating macro is so important. Since your body mines for the essential amino acids found in protein, it will continue to send out hunger signals and cravings until it gets what it needs. And that's why when I began filling up on more of the good stuff, I stopped craving the junk foods that were keeping me stuck. Since eating more protein means eating less overall calories, I have room a few times each week for my favorite meals. And that leads us to the second rule I follow to keep eating everything I love while still losing weight, and that's tracking every meal. This rule is especially important since there's no way to be consistent with rule number 1 without tracking. While guessing can get you into the ballpark with protein, I quickly learned just how easy it is to slide back into my low protein habits when I don't pay attention. But protein isn't the only thing that matters for weight loss. After regaining 50 of the 100 pounds I lost with keto and fasting, I eventually learned that eating in the right energy balance is even more important. So while I no longer pay close attention to carbs or fats, tracking protein and calories can make or break your weight loss plan. And the good news about tracking is I don't have to follow any crazy diet rules in order to make my plan work. If there's a food that I'm craving, all I have to do is figure out a way to fit it into my calorie budget. Sometimes that means I eat a burger without the bun if I need to cut a few hundred calories. Other times, I might only eat half of the fries. But as long as I stay accountable with tracking, I have the ability to make any food work. The third rule I follow to fit more of the foods I love into my diet is to save carbs for the end of my meal. Back in the day, I was taught to avoid carbs completely since they result in a blood sugar spike that leads to cravings and uncontrollable hunger. But once my hormones took a nosedive from eating too little carbs for too long, that was no longer an option. Thankfully, I learned that when you eat protein and veggies first, this leads to a lower blood sugar spike. And a lower blood sugar spike means less hunger and cravings throughout the day. So once I said goodbye to plans that cut out all of my favorite foods, I was able to enjoy foods like rice, pasta, and even potatoes without uncontrollable cravings. The fourth rule I follow to fit more of the foods I love came from the realization that eating highly processed foods only drives hunger and cravings. So even though I keep some processed foods in my diet, I limit them. Now, before you start throwing tomatoes at me because I started by saying that you can eat everything you want, you have to hear me out. While it's completely true that my flexible diet, I can eat anything, even processed junk food, I still have to be strategic. This is a lesson that took me decades to learn. But once I figured out that whenever my diet was centered around highly processed diet foods that I felt like crap and I couldn't keep the weight off, I finally learned the value of real food. With the processed food-based diets that I followed in the past, I was living on chemical junk food that leads to overeating. And since it seemed like I could never get a hold of my hunger, it wasn't shocking to learn that basing your diet on processed foods leads to overeating by up to 600 calories per day. Plus, my body still wasn't getting the nutrients it requires, which left me with low energy and cravings. So that's not to say that I'm a diet perfectionist and only eat whole foods, because I am far from it. But these days, I am way more strategic with my food choices, which leaves room for my favorite foods. The final rule I follow to fit all of my favorite foods is I quit being so strict during the week, only to blow it on the weekend. I found that whenever I white-knuckled my way through a diet during the week, I always went off the rails by the weekend, and any progress I struggled to make was never enough to cancel out the damage done by a weekend that was completely out of control. So even though I worked hard during the week, overdoing it on the weekends always led to a weight loss stall. I overcame blowing my diet every single weekend by allowing myself more wiggle room during the week. So instead of starting every Monday with I must stick to my diet come hell or high water attitude, I use strategies like calorie cycling to make dieting so much easier. When I no longer felt deprived during the week, I was more in control around food on the weekend. And this allows me to eat what I love while still maintaining control. And now that you know the 5 rules I follow to lose 40 pounds without hating what I eat, you can put these rules to work. But before any of these rules worked for me, there was one habit that changed how I approached weight loss forever, because it finally made the weight loss process make sense. You can make it make sense too by watching this video next.